The hum of the high-resolution scanner was usually a soothing, almost meditative sound, a backdrop to my meticulous work of digitizing centuries of family history. For years, this ancient portrait had hung in the dim light of our ancestral study, its subject, my great-great-grandmother Alara, gazing out with an air of quiet dignity. Her hazel eyes seemed to hold countless untold stories, a silent testament to a lineage I revered. As an amateur genealogist, I dedicated countless hours to preserving these fragments, believing each scan brought me closer to my heritage. This particular oil on canvas from the late 18th century was a crown jewel, a symbol of our family's enduring presence. My setup was state-of-the-art, designed to extract every nuance from faded documents. Today, I pushed boundaries, utilizing a multispectral imaging technique to uncover hidden details beneath layers of varnish and time. The process was slow, painstaking, each pass revealing microscopic imperfections. I watched the image coalesce on my monitor, Alara's familiar face gaining clarity. Then it happened. A faint anomaly, a shadow beneath the surface began to emerge. I adjusted filters, enhanced contrast, and zoomed in with trembling fingers. There it was, an almost imperceptible outline, a ghostly echo of another face hidden beneath the paint of my great-great-grandmother. Not a trick of light, but a deliberate, carefully concealed visage peering out from beneath Alara's serene expression. The discovery hit me with the force of a physical blow. My breath hitched. The scanner's hum now a deafening roar. Shock gave way to profound disbelief. How could this be? I ran the scan again, manipulating every parameter, but the spectral image persisted, undeniable and haunting. This wasn't merely an artistic curiosity, a discarded sketch, or a simple overpainting. No, this felt different. It was too deliberate, too meticulously obscured, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase a presence, to bury a truth. A cold knot formed in my stomach, quickly morphing into unease and a chilling sense of potential betrayal. The hidden face, though obscured, hinted at a past identity, a forgotten individual, raising a torrent of questions. Who was this person? Why were they hidden? And most disturbingly, who possessed the power and motive to commit such an act of historical erasure? The implications were staggering, reaching far beyond the canvas itself. My hands, usually so steady, now trembled uncontrollably as I stared at the digital ghost, a silent accusation from the past. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was no accident, but a secret, meticulously guarded for generations. As initial shock subsided, a familiar, unsettling presence coalesced in my mind, casting a long, insidious shadow. Without needing to voice a name, I knew precisely who would have been capable of such a profound act of concealment, who would have fostered a secret with such obsessive dedication. My great-aunt Serafina. She was the self-appointed matriarch of our family's narrative, a formidable woman who held an almost pathological reverence for our lineage, particularly for this very painting. She had always insisted on its unparalleled significance, its pristine condition, and its untouchable status as a cornerstone of our heritage. Any deviation from her meticulously crafted family history was met with a frosty glare, a dismissive wave, or a pointed, silencing comment. I recalled countless instances where questions about certain ancestors or minor inconsistencies in the official family lore would elicit an almost panicked agitation from her. She would quickly steer conversations away, her eyes darting, a subtle tightening of her jaw. Her past actions and carefully chosen words, once dismissed as eccentricities, now seemed to hint at a deeply guarded secret, a truth she had fiercely protected, perhaps even engineered. This portrait, in her hands, was not merely art. It was a testament, a shield, a carefully constructed facade. The full implications of this single, faint image were just beginning to dawn on me, a creeping realization that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't merely a genealogical footnote. This was an earthquake beneath the foundations of our family's identity. This discovery, this spectral face, possessed the power to unravel generations of carefully constructed narratives, to expose a truth that someone, likely Serafina, had desperately wanted to keep buried, forever consigned to oblivion. The carefully curated stories, the proud lineage, the very fabric of our perceived history, all hung precariously on the revelation of this hidden individual. The full scope of what this meant, the emotional fallout, the shattered reputations, the potential for scandal, all remained shrouded in a terrifying mystery. But I knew, with an absolute certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. The past, it seemed, had a way of refusing to stay quiet, of demanding its due. Sometimes, the past demands to be seen, no matter how deeply it's buried. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The faint outline of that hidden face, barely visible beneath the layers of oil and time, had done more than just shock me. It had shattered the very foundation of what I thought I knew about my family, a foundation built on generations of carefully curated stories and unwavering tradition. Our village, nestled deep within the valley, was a place where history wasn't just remembered. It was lived. Every cobblestone street, every ancient oak, whispered tales of our ancestors. And at the heart of it all stood the Hawthorne lineage, my family, renowned for its steadfast adherence to custom, its deep respect for the past, and its seemingly impeccable moral compass. We were, in the eyes of the community, the very embodiment of tradition, custodians of a heritage that stretched back centuries, a legacy meticulously preserved and proudly displayed. Family portraits weren't mere decorations in our ancestral home. They were sacred texts, visual chronicles of our unbroken line, each brushstroke a testament to continuity and an unspoken promise to uphold the family name. They hung in the grand hall, silent guardians, each face a chapter in our collective story. The portrait I was digitizing, of my great-great-grandmother, Eleanor, was among the most revered. It depicted her in her prime, regal and serene, a symbol of the grace and fortitude that defined the Hawthorne women. The community held our family in high esteem, looking to us for guidance on matters of heritage, propriety, and even local governance. Our name carried weight, a silent assurance of integrity, and an unwavering commitment to the values passed down through generations. This social reality, this carefully constructed image of respectability, was as much a part of my identity as my own breath. My days, until that fateful scan, had been a tapestry woven with the comfortable threads of routine. Mornings spent poring over old ledgers, afternoons volunteering at the local historical society, evenings filled with quiet dinners and discussions with friends who also cherished our shared heritage. We were a close-knit community, bound by shared values and a reverence for the past. There was a comforting predictability to it all, a sense of belonging that felt unshakable, a quiet pride in knowing my place within such an esteemed lineage. My social circle consisted of fellow history enthusiasts, local academics, and long-standing family friends, all of whom shared a similar reverence for our collective past. We would often gather, exchanging anecdotes, poring over old photographs, and reinforcing the established narratives of our ancestors' triumphs and virtues. This seemingly idyllic facade, however, now felt like a fragile shell, on the verge of cracking under the weight of an inconvenient truth. I had always been fiercely proud of my roots, of the Hawthorne name. I had dedicated years to tracing our family tree, meticulously documenting every branch, every leaf, filling in the gaps with painstaking research and heartfelt dedication. My passion for genealogy wasn't just a hobby. It was an innate calling, a profound desire to connect with those who came before me, to understand the tapestry of lives that led to my own existence. But beneath that pride, a subtle current of unease had always run, a whisper, easily dismissed, that not everything was as pristine as it seemed. Moments when a story felt too perfect, a detail too conveniently forgotten, a silence too deliberate, I'd always brushed it off as the romanticism of history, the inevitable embellishment of time, or perhaps just the limits of available documentation. Now, that whisper had become a shout, echoing from the hidden face, demanding attention, demanding a reckoning. The discomfort, once a fleeting shadow, now felt like a persistent chill in the air. And then there was Aunt Seraphina, my great-aunt, the undisputed matriarch, the self-appointed keeper of all things Hawthorne. She possessed an almost fanatical devotion to our lineage, particularly to certain narratives she deemed sacrosanct. The portrait of Eleanor, in particular, was her holy grail. She'd inherited it directly, and though it now resided in the family archives, she still treated it with a fierce, proprietary gaze, as if it held the very essence of her authority, the very key to her dominion over our shared past. Her pronouncements on family history were gospel, delivered with an air of unchallengeable authority that brooked no dissent. She was the one who curated the stories, who decided which ancestors were celebrated and which were relegated to footnotes if mentioned at all. I remembered countless instances over the years when I or others would innocently inquire about a particular ancestor, a missing branch on the family tree, or a curious discrepancy in an old diary. Seraphina's reaction was always the same: a swift, almost imperceptible hardening of her eyes, a dismissive wave of her hand, and a pronouncement that the matter was unimportant or already settled. Her voice, usually a melodic purr, would take on an edge of steel, a subtle warning woven into her words. "Some things are best left undisturbed, my dear," she would often say, her gaze lingering a little too long on me, as if daring me to challenge her carefully constructed historical edifice. She had a way of making any questioning of the family narrative feel like a personal affront, a betrayal of loyalty. It was a subtle form of control, a quiet assertion of power that maintained the facade of an untroubled past. Her possessiveness extended beyond mere stories. She had always been unusually protective of Eleanor's portrait, insisting on its placement in the most prominent spot in the Grand Hall before it was moved to the climate-controlled archives, overseeing its cleaning with a hawk-like vigilance and reacting with barely concealed irritation if anyone suggested a different angle for a photograph or a new way to preserve it. It wasn't just reverence, it was control, a deep-seated need to dictate its narrative, to ensure its story, her story, remained unchallenged. Any deviation from her prescribed historical account was met with a coldness that, while not overtly hostile, was certainly effective in shutting down further inquiry. She would change the subject abruptly, or subtly imply that the questioner was simply misinformed, or perhaps even disrespectful of the family's heritage. These early tensions, these subtle skirmishes over the interpretation of our shared past, now resonated with a new, unsettling clarity. Now, looking at the spectral image beneath Eleanor's serene smile, Seraphina's past pronouncements, her subtle aggressions, her fervent guardianship of the painting, all coalesced into a chilling mosaic. The pieces were starting to fit, not into a picture of proud heritage, but one of deliberate obfuscation, of a truth actively suppressed. The idyllic facade of our family, of our revered history, felt like a thin veil, ready to be torn away by the ghost of a forgotten face, and the silent, powerful will of the woman who had so fiercely guarded its secret for decades. The discomfort I had always felt, the vague sense of something off, had finally found its terrifying anchor. The unsettling discovery of the hidden face beneath the meticulously rendered surface of the family portrait had not merely introduced a new mystery, it had ignited a smoldering fire of long-held resentments and unearthed the deep-seated roots of conflict that had always subtly defined our family's intricate dynamics. For generations, our lineage had been a carefully constructed edifice, seemingly solid and unyielding, yet always underpinned by a specific, almost rigid power structure. At its core, or so it had always felt, was the figure of the antagonist, whose presence loomed large, dictating not just the narratives we told about ourselves, but also the very expectations and roles each of us was meant to inhabit. Their word was often final, their interpretation of history sacrosanct, leaving little room for dissent or alternative perspectives. This wasn't merely a matter of respect for an elder, it was an unspoken law, a subtle tyranny of tradition that had shaped every interaction, every celebration, every quiet moment of reflection within our ancestral home. The antagonist's grip on the family story was absolute, a powerful tool wielded with an almost unconscious mastery, ensuring that their version of events remained the unchallenged truth. My mind began to sift through a mosaic of past events, replaying specific memories with a newfound chilling clarity. I recalled old arguments, not necessarily explosive confrontations, but quiet, insidious disagreements that had left indelible marks. There were long-standing resentments, unspoken grievances that simmered beneath the surface of polite smiles and forced conviviality during family gatherings. I remembered countless instances where the antagonist's version of family history was presented not as a recollection, but as an unchallengeable, divinely ordained truth. Any attempt to question a detail, to offer a different perspective gleaned from an old letter or a forgotten anecdote, was met with a dismissive wave of the hand, a patronizing smile, or a curt declaration that I simply didn't understand the complexities of our past. These interactions, once brushed off as mere generational differences or the eccentricities of an elder, now took on a sinister hue. They highlighted with stark and painful precision my gradual, almost imperceptible realization of the antagonist's deeply manipulative tendencies, their need to control the narrative, to sculpt reality to fit their preconceived notions, or perhaps to hide something far more profound. The portrait itself, this very painting that had yielded its secret to the digital scanner, held its own official origin story, a narrative that had been recited countless times. It was said to have been commissioned by a distant, revered ancestor, a matriarch of considerable influence, as a testament to her enduring legacy and the family's prosperity. It occupied a special, almost hallowed place in the main hall, its gilded frame catching the light, its primary subject gazing out with an air of serene authority. The story went that it was painted by a renowned artist of the era, an expensive commission that spoke volumes of our family's standing. Yet, as I now looked back, certain inconsistencies, certain odd details surrounding its history began to subtly surface in my memory. Why had the artist's full name never been prominently displayed, despite their supposed fame? Why were there no other known works by this artist in our region? And why, precisely, had the antagonist always been so fiercely protective of it, almost to the point of obsession, refusing to let it be moved or even properly cleaned by anyone but themselves? These were questions I had never dared to voice aloud, questions that now felt heavy with unspoken meaning, hinting at a hidden truth far more intricate than the official, carefully crafted tale. These emotional wounds, initially minor and dismissed as insignificant, laid the groundwork for a deeper, insidious distrust. I recalled instances where I felt dismissed, my intelligence subtly undermined, or my contributions to family discussions undervalued by the antagonist, especially when my own interpretations of family history or traditions diverged from theirs. There was a particular incident during a genealogical research project I had undertaken years ago, a project I had poured my heart into. I had uncovered a fascinating tangent in our family tree, a branch that led to a less prominent, yet equally legitimate, lineage. When I presented my findings to the antagonist, eager to share this expanded view of our heritage, they had not only scoffed at my efforts, but had actively discouraged any further investigation, claiming it was irrelevant and distracting from the true family narrative. The sting of that dismissal, the sense of my intellectual efforts being trivialized, had lingered. It was a clear message. Only their version of the past mattered. Only their stories held weight. These small, repeated acts of emotional invalidation, the subtle gaslighting that chipped away at my confidence, had cultivated a quiet, persistent doubt within me. I had learned to internalize my questions, to keep my curiosities to myself, but the seeds of distrust had been sown, waiting for the right catalyst to finally bloom into full-blown suspicion. The hidden face was that catalyst, shattering the fragile peace and forcing me to confront the uncomfortable reality of a past that had been deliberately, meticulously curated, The initial sting of dismissal regarding my genealogical research was not an isolated incident. It was one thread in a tapestry woven with years of subtle slights and calculated emotional barbs. Over time, these small episodes accumulated, each a tiny chip from the foundation of my trust and respect for the antagonist. There was the constant, almost imperceptible way my opinions were undermined in family gatherings, often with a dismissive wave or a patronizing smile suggesting my ideas were naive. I vividly recall a Christmas dinner where I dared to suggest a new interpretation of an old family anecdote, one I had unearthed through diligent research. Before I could finish, the antagonist interjected, correcting me with absolute authority, presenting their version as gospel, effectively silencing me and making me feel foolish. The humiliation was not overt, but deeply felt, a silent message that my voice held no weight. These weren't dramatic confrontations, but a slow, insidious erosion, like water wearing down stone. Then came the broken promises, small at first, but each leaving a raw, exposed nerve. There was the promise to help fund my further education, a commitment made years ago, only to later claim financial difficulties that miraculously disappeared for their own lavish expenditures. I had planned my future around that support, only to have the rug pulled out, forcing me to scramble, take extra jobs, and delay my dreams. The silence surrounding this broken promise was deafening. No apology, no real explanation, just a quiet expectation I would understand. Another time, they had promised to share certain family heirlooms, items with deep sentimental value, assuring me they would be mine. Yet, when I gently inquired years later, they feigned forgetfulness, then claimed the items had disappeared or been given to someone else, a convenient memory lapse that felt like a deliberate slight. These were not just material losses, they were betrayals of trust, wounds inflicted not with anger, but with a cold, calculated indifference. The emotional aggressions were often cloaked in concern or advice, making them difficult to challenge without appearing overly sensitive. "You're trying too hard, dear," they would say, implying my efforts were futile. Or, "You really should focus on more practical matters," devaluing my aspirations. These microaggressions chipped away at my confidence, making me question my own judgment. I often replayed conversations, wondering if I had misunderstood, if I was indeed too sensitive, if their intentions were truly benevolent. This internal conflict, this constant questioning of my perceptions, was a heavy burden. I would retreat into myself, nursing these silent wounds, unable to articulate the exact nature of the offense, because on the surface, everything seemed fine. The gaslighting was so subtle, so interwoven with daily interactions, that it became almost impossible to distinguish truth from manipulation. I started to doubt my own memories and feelings, convinced that perhaps I was the problem. Throughout all of this, the ancient portrait hung in the main hall, a silent gilded sentinel. Its presence, once a source of comfort, began to morph. It became a constant reminder of the official family narrative, the carefully constructed facade the antagonist meticulously maintained. Every time I passed it, I felt its gaze, not just from the painted eyes, but from the invisible, hidden face beneath. It was a symbol of the unspoken, the unacknowledged truths permeating our lives. The portrait, with its air of serene authority, felt like a co-conspirator in the antagonist narrative, a monument to a curated history now riddled with question marks. It represented everything I was told to believe, everything I was expected to uphold. Even as my experiences screamed a different reality, its stillness seemed to mock my internal turmoil, an unyielding representation of supposed family integrity, while beneath its surface, secrets festered. My internal struggle intensified with each passing year. I found myself increasingly doubting the family's integrity, and more specifically, the antagonist's character. The person I had once looked up to was slowly being revealed as a master manipulator, a gatekeeper of selective truths. Yet despite the growing unease, despite the gnawing suspicion, I remained deeply reluctant to confront these uncomfortable truths head-on. The fear of disruption was immense. The thought of shattering the peace, of exposing the rot beneath the surface, felt like an act of betrayal against the very idea of family. What would happen if I spoke out? Would I be ostracized? Would the family fracture? The weight of tradition, the societal pressure to maintain appearances, held me captive. I worried about the ripple effects, the pain it might cause others, the irreversible damage to relationships that, despite flaws, were still deeply woven into my life. I spent countless hours wrestling with these thoughts, caught between the desire for truth and the fear of its consequences. My nights were often restless, my mind replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, searching for definitive proof that my suspicions were justified, or, conversely, that I was imagining things. The more I looked, the more the pieces seemed to fit, forming a mosaic of deception. The antagonist's insistence on a singular narrative, their discomfort with any deviation, their almost pathological need for control over historical artifacts, it all coalesced into a pattern. The portrait, once benign, now felt like a cage, holding both a hidden identity and my suppressed anxieties. I knew deep down that this internal conflict could not last forever. The hidden face, once a faint impression, was now a vivid, haunting presence in my mind, demanding recognition, demanding its story be told. The silent suffering had finally reached a tipping point, though I still lacked the courage to fully articulate it. I was on the precipice, teetering between the comfortable lie and the terrifying truth, knowing that soon something would have to give. The peace I had maintained was a false one, bought at the cost of my own clarity. The portrait watched and waited. The hidden face was that catalyst, shattering the fragile peace and forcing me to confront the uncomfortable reality of a past that had been deliberately, meticulously curated. The quiet, persistent doubt that had festered within me for years now transformed into a burning imperative for truth. I could no longer stand by, a silent observer of a carefully constructed lie. The simmering tensions, once relegated to the unspoken undercurrents of family gatherings, began to boil over. Driven by the unresolved questions about the hidden face, I started to subtly push back against the antagonist's absolute control over our shared family history. This wasn't a direct confrontation yet, not a dramatic accusation, but a series of pointed inquiries, a gentle but firm insistence on examining historical documents they had always deemed settled. My inquiries, initially framed as innocent genealogical curiosities, quickly escalated into more frequent, thinly veiled arguments. These were often disguised as discussions about heritage, about the nuances of our lineage, or the interpretations of old family records. Yet, the air crackled with unspoken tension. The antagonist, usually so composed and authoritative when dictating family lore, became noticeably more defensive, their responses sharper, their agitation barely concealed beneath a veneer of polite dismissal. Their eyes would narrow, a muscle in their jaw would twitch, and their voice would acquire a subtly threatening edge, not in overt words, but in the chilling implication that I was treading on sacred ground, questioning something that should remain unquestioned. They would recount the official version of events with an almost frantic insistence, adding layers of detail that felt increasingly fabricated, as if trying to bury my burgeoning suspicions under a mountain of carefully chosen facts. Each time I brought up a discrepancy, however minor, or suggested an alternative interpretation of an ancestral deed, their reaction was disproportionate, a clear sign that my questions were hitting too close to a nerve. The pressure in the room would become palpable, suffocating, as if the very air was being squeezed out by the weight of their unspoken command to desist. This escalating friction did not go unnoticed. The psychological environment within the family gatherings, and indeed, within the broader community that held our family in such high esteem, became heavy and suffocating. I started to sense silent judgments from other family members, their gazes lingering on me a moment too long when the antagonist and I engaged in one of our loaded discussions. There was a palpable discomfort, a collective unwillingness to interfere or even acknowledge the growing strain. Their silence, their averted eyes, added to my isolation. It was as if I was disturbing a delicate ecosystem, a long-standing peace that everyone preferred to maintain, regardless of the rot beneath the surface. Whispers, though never reaching my ears directly, seemed to ripple through conversations whenever I left a room. I felt like an outsider, the one daring to pull at a loose thread in a tapestry everyone else admired without question. The antagonist, ever the master of social manipulation, would occasionally cast a pitying glance in my direction or make a subtle remark about my overzealous research, subtly painting me as the troublesome one, the disruptor of harmony. This tactic was insidious, making me question my own perceptions for a fleeting moment before the image of that hidden face flashed back into my mind, stealing my resolve. The need for concrete answers became an all-consuming drive. I began a more deliberate, yet utterly clandestine, search for information related to the portrait's era. My usual meticulous genealogical research transformed into a focused investigation, a quiet hunt for any clue that might explain the hidden face. I spent countless hours in dusty archives, poring over microfiche of local newspapers from the period, examining old property records, and cross-referencing names in parish registers. I sought out obscure art history books that detailed provincial portrait painters, hoping to find any mention of the renowned artist our family history claimed had painted the portrait, and predictably found nothing. My investigations extended beyond the public record. I discreetly reached out to distant, often forgotten relatives who might possess old letters, diaries, or oral histories that had escaped the antagonist's careful curation. Each document I reviewed, each conversation I navigated, was a step deeper into a labyrinth of secrets, intensifying the conflict with the antagonist's fervent desire for secrecy. I felt like a detective, piecing together fragments of a forgotten life, driven by an unshakable belief that the truth, however painful, deserved to see the light of day. The hidden face called to me, a silent plea across generations, and I was determined to answer. Every late night spent hunched over faded documents, every hushed phone call, every surreptitious visit to a historical society was a testament to my unwavering commitment to unraveling the enigma that now defined my existence. This was no longer just about a painting. It was about reclaiming a piece of our collective truth, a truth that had been cruelly denied. The fragile piece had not merely shattered, it had exploded into 1,000 jagged shards, each one reflecting a distorted truth. The hidden face, once a faint whisper from the past, now roared, demanding attention, demanding justice. My internal struggle, once a quiet battle of self-doubt, transformed into an unshakable resolve. The subtle slights, the dismissals, the carefully constructed narratives I had once accepted, now coalesced into a clear pattern of manipulation, a desperate attempt to bury inconvenient truths. The antagonist, sensing my burgeoning investigations, perhaps even feeling the tremor of their carefully guarded secret beginning to crack, escalated their tactics with a chilling ruthlessness that erased any lingering shred of familial affection. Their first move was insidious, a quiet campaign to discredit my research, painting me as overly emotional, prone to flights of fancy and obsessed with trivial details. Rumors began to circulate within the wider family circle, subtle whispers designed to undermine my credibility. I overheard hushed conversations, saw averted gazes, felt the sudden coolness in interactions that had once been warm. The antagonist, a master of psychological warfare, knew precisely how to leverage social dynamics, how to turn polite skepticism into outright suspicion. They would casually mention my recent fixation on the portrait, always with a tone of gentle concern that masked a venomous intent, implying I was losing my grip. They suggested I was disrespecting the memory of our ancestors by digging up old bones that were best left undisturbed. It was a calculated attempt to isolate me, to make me doubt my own sanity, to make others dismiss my eventual findings as the ramblings of an unbalanced mind. but their desperation truly revealed itself when they made a direct move on the portrait itself. One morning, I arrived at the main hall, drawn by an inexplicable dread, only to find the hallowed space empty. The gilded frame, the serene gaze of the primary subject, all gone. A gaping, empty rectangle on the wall stared back at me, a stark testament to the antagonist's panic. They had physically removed the painting under the guise of sending it for professional restoration, a sudden, unannounced decision that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. They were unaware, of course, that the digital scan already existed, that the secret was already out of the frame, residing safely on my hard drive. This act, however, was no longer a subtle manipulation. It was a desperate, tangible admission of guilt. It was proof that they knew the portrait held a secret they were willing to go to extreme lengths to protect, even if it meant risking damage to a revered family heirloom. Their actions served as definitive, undeniable proof of their culpability, solidifying my resolve to uncover every last shard of truth. Now fully committed, my investigation shifted from tentative curiosity to relentless pursuit. The digital image of the hidden face became my compass, guiding me through forgotten archives and dusty family records. I spent countless nights poring over old letters tucked away in cedar chests, their brittle pages whispering stories of a bygone era. I cross-referenced dates, names, and events, searching for any anomalies, any omissions in the official family narrative. I discovered forgotten journals, their faded ink revealing the intimate thoughts of distant relatives, their entries often coded or hinting at unspoken tragedies. One particular journal, belonging to a distant cousin who lived during the portrait's supposed creation, became my most invaluable find. Its entries, initially cryptic, slowly began to piece together a different reality. There were mentions of a sad affair, a hasty departure, and a child born out of season, always followed by heavy ellipses or carefully redacted sections. The cousin's lamentations spoke of a great injustice and a sacrifice for appearances, phrases that resonated with the hidden face behind the paint. The journal described hushed conversations, the palpable tension within the household, and the antagonist's ancestor, the very matriarch who supposedly commissioned the portrait, as a formidable figure obsessed with reputation and lineage. It detailed how a young woman, a relative of lesser standing but striking beauty, had fallen pregnant, a scandal that threatened to unravel the family's carefully constructed image. The journal hinted at a desperate cover-up, a choice made to protect the family name at the cost of an individual's identity and future. The hidden face began to solidify, not just as an outline but as a person, a life erased for the sake of social standing. The reason for its concealment was becoming terrifyingly clear. Not just a forgotten child, but a deliberate act of historical erasure, sanctioned by the very people lauded as pillars of our lineage. With each new document, each deciphered entry, the identity of the hidden face became less a mystery and more a tragic certainty. The tension in my own life became almost unbearable. The antagonist's desperate measures had failed to deter me. In fact, they had only fueled my determination. I knew with an icy clarity that a direct confrontation was no longer a choice, but an inevitability. The truth, meticulously pieced together from fragments of the past, was a volatile explosive, ready to detonate. The world I had known, the family I had believed in, was about to shatter, and I was the one holding the match. Everything I thought I understood about my heritage, about the people I called family, was about to be irrevocably changed. The explosion was imminent, and I braced myself for the devastating fallout. The detonation I had braced myself for was no longer a distant threat, but an immediate reality. Armed with irrefutable evidence, the culmination of countless sleepless nights and painstaking research, I knew the time for subtlety had passed. The moment for truth, raw and unvarnished, had arrived. I arranged a family gathering, ostensibly for a discussion about preserving our heritage, a topic the antagonist always championed, believing it to be their exclusive domain. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable unease that had permeated our interactions for weeks. As they settled into their familiar positions, radiating an aura of self-importance, I felt a strange calm descend upon me, the quiet resolve of someone who holds a powerful, dangerous secret. I projected the high-resolution digital image of the portrait onto a large screen, its familiar beauty now imbued with an unsettling duality. The primary subject, the revered matriarch, gazed out with serene confidence, but the faint, ghostly outline of another face, barely perceptible to the untrained eye, shimmered beneath her painted visage, a silent scream from the past. Then, with a voice that surprised even myself with its steadiness, I began to speak, not of preservation, but of revelation. I unveiled the hidden face, not as an artistic anomaly, but as a person, a life deliberately erased. "This," I stated, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces, "is not merely a trick of light or an artist's whim. This is the portrait of Alara, a distant cousin, painted over by the matriarch's image. Alara, who was disowned, banished, and her very existence scrubbed from our family records because she dared to fall in love and bear a child out of wedlock. I laid bare the story, meticulously pieced together from the cousin's journal, from faded birth records, and from hushed entries in parish registers. Alara, a young woman of vibrant spirit and undeniable beauty, had indeed fallen pregnant by a man deemed unsuitable by the family's rigid social standards. The scandal in their eyes threatened to stain their pristine lineage, to unravel their carefully constructed image of respectability. The matriarch, the very ancestor, the antagonist so fiercely protected and emulated, had orchestrated a cruel and comprehensive cover-up. Alara was sent away in disgrace, her child born in secret, given a different name, and adopted into another family, far from any association with our illustrious name. The portrait, initially commissioned to celebrate Alara's engagement to a more acceptable suitor, was hastily repainted, her face obliterated beneath layers of oil paint, replaced by the stoic, unblemished face of the family's matriarch. It was a symbolic act of erasure, a public declaration that Alara and her child simply did not exist. The antagonist's ancestor hadn't just hidden a face, she had buried a life, a lineage, an entire branch of our family tree, all for the sake of appearances and the preservation of a fabricated legacy. The antagonist's reaction was immediate and visceral, a grotesque spectacle of denial and rage. Their face, usually composed and imperious, contorted into a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is preposterous!" they shrieked, their voice cracking with a desperate, frantic energy. "A fabrication! A malicious lie designed to undermine everything our family stands for!" They lunged forward, attempting to rip the projection screen down, their hands trembling with uncontrolled anger. Their carefully constructed world, built on generations of selective memory and deliberate omissions, was crumbling before their very eyes. They railed against me, accusing me of slander, of disrespecting our ancestors, of attempting to rewrite history with baseless accusations. They desperately tried to regain control, to manipulate the narrative one last time, to dismiss the evidence as a childish prank or a misunderstanding of historical context. But the digital image remained, unwavering and stark, a silent testament to the truth. The hidden details, the spectral eyes of Alara, seemed to pierce through the layers of deception, reflecting the matriarch's guilt and the antagonist's own complicity in maintaining the lie. Their arguments became increasingly unhinged, their words losing all coherence as the weight of the revelation pressed down upon them, crushing their carefully cultivated facade. They pleaded with other family members, their eyes darting wildly, seeking validation, seeking someone to side with them against what they perceived as an attack on their very identity. But the silence that met their pleas was deafening, a collective acknowledgement of the devastating truth I had just unveiled. The emotional cataclysm that followed was profound, altering the entire trajectory of our family's understanding of itself. For me, the shift was immense. The nagging doubts, the subtle suspicions, the deep-seated unease that had plagued me for years, suddenly coalesced into a painful, undeniable clarity. The betrayal was not just a historical event, it was a living wound, perpetuated by the antagonist's unwavering commitment to the lie. The pride I once held for our noble lineage shattered, replaced by a complex mixture of sorrow for Alara, anger at the injustice, and a strange, liberating sense of truth. It was a painful understanding, a realization that the foundations of our family history were built on a deliberate act of cruelty and erasure. The antagonist's deep betrayal, their obsessive protection of this fabricated past, suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. Their controlling nature, their dismissal of dissenting voices, their desperate attempts to hide the portrait, all of it was illuminated by the stark, unforgiving light of Ilara's hidden face. My world, once defined by the comforting myths of my ancestors, was irrevocably changed, reshaped by the echoes of a forgotten tragedy and the powerful, undeniable force of a truth that had finally demanded to be seen. The emotional landscape of our family was now a fractured terrain, and there was no turning back from the chasm that had opened before us. The explosion was imminent, and I braced myself for the devastating fallout. The confrontation, when it finally arrived, was less a clash of wills and more a slow, agonizing unraveling under the harsh glare of truth. I chose a moment of assumed family harmony, a gathering where the portrait usually held court, its silent presence a testament to the very lies I was about to expose. With the digital scan projected for all to see, revealing the ghostly image beneath the surface, and the brittle pages of the journal laid out, each entry a damning piece of the puzzle, the antagonist's meticulously constructed world began to crack. Their initial reaction was a predictable cocktail of outrage and denial, a theatrical performance of victimhood, attempting to dismiss my findings as malicious fabrications, the ramblings of a jealous mind. But the evidence was too compelling, too layered to be easily brushed aside. The other family members, initially stunned into silence, reacted with a spectrum of emotions. Some, accustomed to the antagonist's dominance, clung to their disbelief, whispering doubts, their faces a mask of confusion and discomfort. Others, however, particularly those who had harbored their own quiet suspicions over the years, felt a tremor of recognition. The truth, once spoken aloud, began to resonate, filling the silences the antagonist had so carefully cultivated. The immediate consequences for them were stark and swift. The carefully curated respect they commanded, built on generations of fabricated narratives, began to erode. Whispers turned into open questions, and the community, ever observant, began to recalibrate their perception of our esteemed lineage. The edifice of their social standing, once so formidable, showed its first visible cracks, not through an external assault, but from a truth unearthed from within. The initial fallout was a tempest, ripping through the placid waters of our family's public image, leaving behind a profound sense of disorientation and betrayal. The process of rebuilding was arduous, a slow and painful reconstruction of my own identity and understanding of the world. The pain of realizing the depth of the deception, the sheer audacity of erasing a life for the sake of appearances, left a raw wound. Relationships, once taken for granted, had to be reevaluated. Some withered under the weight of the revelation, unable to reconcile the truth with their cherished illusions or their loyalty to the antagonist. Others, surprisingly, deepened. Distant cousins, once mere acquaintances, reached out, sharing their own fragmented memories or subtle doubts, creating a new, authentic web of connection. I found solace in these nascent bonds, in the shared recognition of a history far more complex and human than I had ever been led to believe. This period was marked by small, yet significant victories of self-discovery. I shed the inherited narratives that had never quite fit, allowing myself to explore who I was without the shadow of a manufactured past. The hidden face, once a symbol of injustice, transformed into a beacon of resilience, a reminder that even erased lives leave an indelible mark, demanding to be seen. I accepted that some losses were inevitable, even necessary for true growth, for the forging of an identity built on bedrock, not sand. The final consequence for the antagonist unfolded with a quiet, yet devastating, inevitability. Their power, once absolute and unquestioned, built entirely on the foundation of a lie, utterly dissolved. The carefully constructed authority they had wielded over family narratives, over heirlooms, over even the emotional lives of those around them, simply evaporated. Their reputation, once pristine and unassailable, became irrevocably tarnished, synonymous with deceit and manipulation. The community, once reverent, now looked upon them with a mixture of pity and disdain, their carefully cultivated image shattered beyond repair. They were left isolated, their influence diminished to a mere echo of its former self, a stark monument to the fragility of a life built on falsehoods. The family legacy, once a rigid, unchallengeable monolith, was redefined, not by their fabricated version, but by the painful, liberating truth I had unearthed. It was a complete moral and social downfall, a consequence far more profound than any legal retribution, for it stripped them of the very thing they had valued above all else, their carefully constructed honor. In the end, I found a profound sense of justice and emotional peace, not through vengeance, but through the triumph of truth and the reclamation of my authentic self. The hidden face, the forgotten child, finally saw the light, their story woven back into the tapestry of our family history. My journey had been arduous, fraught with doubt and pain, but it had led me to a deeper understanding of my roots. Not just the celebrated triumphs, but also the hushed tragedies and the quiet acts of courage. I reflected on the enduring nature of truth, how it always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it is buried, or how many generations try to obscure it. The complexities of family secrets, the intricate web of love, loyalty, and lies became clearer, not simpler, but understandable in their human frailty. Reclaiming my authentic past was not just an intellectual exercise, it was an emotional liberation, a profound act of self-acceptance. The portrait, once a symbol of deception, now hung as a testament to resilience, a reminder that every face, seen or unseen, holds a story worthy of being told, leaving a lasting sense of impact and the weighty understanding that some journeys, though painful, are absolutely essential for the soul's true peace.